Pleasure to introduce Dick O'Malley, a noted local genealogy researcher who will lead us in serendipitous discoveries and lessons learned about conquering brick walls encountered in genealogy research. Hailing from Basking Ridge, Dick is a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, as well as the Morris Area Genealogy Society and others. Please join me in welcoming Dick O'Malley.
Thank you. We're off. Before we begin, I just wanted to say in general that you guys are competing with the local genealogy meeting that's held the fourth Tuesday of the month in Basking Ridge at the library there. There's also a meeting on the first Tuesday of the month of the Morris Area Genealogy Society, which is held at the Morris County Library. Both of those meetings start around 7 o'clock. And so if you're interested, you may find you would learn something in attending these. Now, this talk is going to talk about lessons learned and discoveries of continued research. But before I begin, you folks haven't had the wonderful opportunity to learn all about my own genealogy research. So I thought I'd start the talk with a little bit of help from a chart that I put together. Can I get somebody to help me? Okay. This is a so-called 9-generation chart. And as you can see, the chart is kind of lopsided. It's a lot more filled in on the bottom than there is on the top. Well, it turns out that I'm from what was called a mixed marriage. My Irish father married a French-Canadian woman whose parents had immigrated to New Hampshire. And the fact of the matter is that for Irish, you can't go back much before 1850 for common Irish. That's when the civil records started. The church records were available for Church of Ireland, but the Catholic Church didn't keep records because there were problems with the government. On the other hand, the people came to Canada from France in the 1660s, and they brought with them French priests. And those priests used exactly the same system of recording that they had used in France. So, if you can find your relatives in around 1890 or so, within 15 minutes, you can find your way back to France in the 1600s. So finding French-Canadian ancestors is like shooting fish in a barrel. Finding Irish ancestors is like fishing all day. But I wanted to show you that because it gives you an idea of the sense. The 9 generations on the Canadian side are just arbitrary. The paper was only that big. You could do a dozen generations or more. On the other hand, I can get to 7 generations of O'Malleys, and that's interesting because almost all of that is from family sources. I've never found any records from the 1800s on back. But that gives you an idea of what we're starting from, and where we're going, and so on. But the idea wasn't to really talk about my ancestry so much, come on in, as what you can discover as you go along. I have here some handouts of the charts that we're using. and they may be handy for you. You can make notes of them and so on. Okay, first chart, please. Here we go. Here's the hero. I have a couple of heroes in doing my genealogy research. And one of them is my cousin, Una O'Malley. I think she's a third cousin. She passed away in 2009. Fortunately, I met Una in the 1990s. And she lived on the farm that my great-grandfather, Michael O'Malley, left. She lived in a place called Kinadui on the coast of Mayo. And Una lived in this two-room, thatched roof cottage until the 1990s, when the Celtic Tiger worked and the Irish people had all kinds of money from the European Union. And she had a home built across the street, 3 bedrooms. She lived there with her nephew. And he was a shepherd for her, and she had perhaps 100 sheep at that time. Now, the next slide, please. As I said, she passed away in 2009. I was very upset by that because in the last couple years, Una was difficult to contact. It was that she was home, wasn't home all the time, and she was in the hospital often. But I couldn't locate her or anyone else, and that really upset me. And I could Google, and when I Googled to find out about an obituary or something, I found nothing. Finally, I did find a little thing that said Una O'Malley passed away. And that really got me mad, because in that parish, they had a magazine, On Conil, which means a candle. They had published this magazine, sort of the size of the Reader's Digest. They published it every couple years for almost 50 years. And in that time, Una had written perhaps 25 articles. So she was a local historian and a local family person, and she had all the stuff. And here she goes and passes away, and there's no notice. There's nothing. It turns out that her nephew, John Joseph, died 7 weeks before her. That was a wonderful write-up in the paper, which I'm sure Una did. But when she passed away, nothing. So it was 2 years later until the parish publication came out again. And finally, there were 6 pages devoted to a tribute to her. And so that was really rewarding to me, because she had been my primary contact. She's a local historian. Other people who I know in Ireland, professional genealogists, knew of her work and all. So it was great to get that. And in fact, I found out more about her in some of these write-ups, things that she would never have mentioned to me. So next slide, please. Oh, go to the next one. I don't want to use that one. Okay. When you get son-in-laws, you wonder about them. I have a son-in-law, Tim. And I think Tim is a wasp. And I look at his background, and it's got Hinners, and it's got Yotters, and it's got Harringtons and Yotters, Lawrences, and so on. Next one, please. So it looks all American, his background in New York State. But then you start going into Canada, and you get names which I can't read any longer. But they're Yotters and so on. He starts to get kind of a French orientation. And that's something entirely new to me. How do I know about this guy, Yoder, who's coming up with a name Göring or something like that? What's happened to this guy? Well, it turns out he grew up in northern New York State, and his immigrants came across the border from Canada into New York. And so we found out, we did a little bit of research with the American Canadian Genealogy Society in Manchester, New Hampshire, where they do searching of your lines for maybe $35. They'll trace them. And they did his lines for me. They had to charge me more because it was more difficult. I think they charged me $50. And they discovered that his family had come from Germany into New France. That was unusual. And I'm looking for a connection between my family, representing my daughter, and him. I don't find any, but I do find some details. Everything in Canada was recorded in Quebec. Recorded by notaries. And a notary named Duquette had written in one of the books that I had that Francois Dubois, that's my relative, dit La France. They use a thing called dit, which is a nickname. Sometimes they call him Francois La France, sometimes they call him Francois Dubois. And in the same way, Francois Dubois and Pierre Molière dit l'Allemand, which means German. So Pierre Molière or Pierre the German, they worked together to clear land for Guillaume Albert for so many francs, and they would do it in such a time. So I didn't find that there was a relationship there. There's a family relationship. But very shortly after these two immigrants came to North America, they were working together on the south side of the St. Lawrence River across from Quebec, doing work together. Shortly after that, Molière-Guertin line went to the Montreal area, whereas the Dubois line and Binet line that I would come from stayed in the Quebec area. So Tim and Ann aren't related, but they had relationships between the families. Next one, please. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead. Okay. Yeah, again. Okay, now looking for death information. I had an uncle named Leo, and his wife was Clara. She was my aunt. We didn't know much about her. She came from Texas. He was in the oil business. He worked for Texaco, and somehow or other in Beaumont, Texas, or so, he met up with Clara and they married. Well, it turns out that in his later years, he was in charge of a refinery that Texaco had in Bayonne. And he was great friends with the undertaker, a guy named O'Brien, who handled that stuff. And when Clara passed away, I found nothing really about her. But then I wrote to the O'Brien funeral home and I said, "What do you know about this?" Oh, they knew of me, and they were very happy to send me the so-called assignment sheet, which says she was born in Beaumont, Texas in 1894. The year was in pencil with the note "not in paper." They didn't want to put her date, her birth date in the paper. The tombstone said she was born in 1898, and I think it was probably 1892. But at any rate, all I'm saying is here's a source of information, the funeral home, that you might not think of. it may have more up-to-date and more perfect records than in the newspaper, obituary or what have you, or even tombstone. Let's go to the next one. Does this look perfect? Here's an O'Malley tombstone in the Killeen Cemetery, a couple miles from where Una lived, and it talks about her dad and mother and her brothers and sisters. And it's a brand new stones, and it's on a bed of rock, and everything around that is perfect. And a couple cousins of mine have been there and sent me this picture, and it explains that John O'Malley, Kinnadewey, and James, he was James of Carrigon and so on, all these people. And everybody's coming back at me and saying, here's the data. Well, they didn't realize, next page, that graveyard looks too perfect. In Ireland, if you walk around in a graveyard, you're going to trip and fall. It's all uneven and it's all over the place. Two cousins, I said, but the thing that they didn't know is that the stonemason who Una paid for these new stones and a new flat yard or what have you, called me before he redid the stone, because he wanted to ask a question of some of the stuff that I had sent to Una on dates. He wasn't sure about my dates. So you can't believe all you read, and you have to be suspicious if it looked too good. So all my cousins were there. They believed exactly what it said on the stone. The guy who carved the stone asked me what I thought about it, because he wasn't so sure. Let's look at some more death information. In Pittsburgh at St. Mary's Cemetery, it's a Catholic cemetery, in the Page plot, the Page family plot, when we got the information from the Catholic cemetery, we found a lot of people who were not mentioned on the gravestone. We had a mother of one lady, her brother who had died in Chicago, and same with other families. We found key relatives. So you can't believe what you see by looking at the gravestone. You have to go and look at and get the cemetery records. Now in this case I think they charged me $65, but they probably gave me 10 pages of information, plus the cause of death and all kinds of other information. But the more information you have, the better off you are. Let's go again. Looking at look at technology. You've heard of the DNA and how they use that and so on. But essentially, the simplest thing is that the DNA up the male line follows. And anybody who's in that male line of direct descent would have the same DNA. So I registered with an organization called Family Tree DNA, and shortly thereafter got a match with an Ian O'Malley of Queensland, Australia. When I dug into it, I found out that my great-grandfather who came here, his father had a brother named Thomas. Thomas left Ireland and was a plasterer in England. And his son John Malley, not O'Malley, was transported to Australia for stealing a hat. $7. He stole a hat, got I'm sorry, was it $7 or 7 years? Anyway, he got a free passage to Australia. And it turns out that my friend Una was able to confirm that there was a Tom, a brother of Daniel, who had gone to England and had consequently visited back in Ireland. So this is another new way now of meeting cousins. So through this match with Ian O'Malley, who didn't always have the name O'Malley, he had it Malley for a while. I've got all kinds of cousins now in Australia that we didn't know anything about. Okay. Since around 2000, I've had a website called dickomalley.com, and I'd ask you to visit it if you would. What happens is that people Google and find their relative or their friend or whatever it is on my website. And then they come to me and ask, oh, do you know Bob, whatever? And they think because he's on my website that I know all about him. Well, I know something about him, enough to put him on the website, but he may not be the most important person in my tree. On the other hand, they know much more about that person that they're asking about, and they're able to fill in articles and fill in other information on some of these further out kind of people. New people can add and supplement and confirm and question what you have. So it's important to have a way to reach out to people, and the website is an important way that I use of doing it. I've also started recently writing a couple of articles. I wrote an article for an Irish thing called SEPS, and a very similar article for a French Franco-American thing called The Genealogist. But what I'm trying to do with this is to get my name out there so that people recognize me as a person who knows something about them. Now, let's go on. Where was John Sheedy born? My wife is a Sheedy. And the papers say they come from Ennis in County Clare. Sheedy is a common name in Clare. The Corofin-based Family History Center for County Clare says there were 3 Sheedy families in places near Ennis where there was a son of about the right age born, John. But they can't tell me which one. So it's like me growing up in New Hampshire and telling somebody I was born near Boston. Then Boston becomes the place. Well, Ennis is the place. But which of the Ennises work? Well, another cousin, using your cousins again, another cousin really did some digging. And he found out that a witness at a marriage of John's parents in Lake Carrow North, Tulla in County Clare, was Maroney. It turns out in the Sheedy cemetery plot in Pittsburgh, there is a Maroney married there. We think that Maroney combination, in effect, establishes Lecaro or Tulla as the birthplace for John Sheedy. We have no records we have the records that show John Sheedy being born there in about the right time, but we don't have confirmation that he's our John Sheedy, except that the fact that they have common people at important family events. Breaks the tie, so to speak. Okay? Where was David Page born? I have information that David Page was born in New York, in Staten Island. His parents were Irish. He worked in sort of the brickyards or something. And in the first or so censuses in that time, around 1941, I believe it was, in New York. But it's all over the lot. Some places say, when you look at his death things, his obituary or other kind of thing, say he was Irish, he was born in Ireland. Other places say he was born in New York. Two family members who have an interest in David Page more than I did some work, and they both came at me independently with naturalization papers from Ancestry, saying he was naturalized in 1909, saying he came to Ireland from Galway in 1841. So, although I thought Staten Island was it, these people proved to me that Galway is it. Lots of people have things to contribute, but they don't know what I need or what I may know, and on the other hand, what they may know. Let's go on with another one of these people. Margaret Henrietta Lynch. There were a lot of Margaret Lynches. One of these Pittsburgh guys, I think it could have been Page, anyway, went to Massachusetts and found a bride. Then came back to Pittsburgh and lived there for the rest of their life. I tried to find Margaret Lynches in Massachusetts, but when you try to do that, there are a lot of Margaret Lynches in Massachusetts. So I went to the New England Historical Genealogy Society, NEHGS, and I asked them what they could find out. And they found a Hester Lynch and a David Page being married in Charlestown, and she was the child of Timothy and Esther Lynch in New Bedford. The mother, under the name Hester, not Esther, is buried in that Page plot in Pittsburgh. So they were very clever, and for an investment of, say, $100, I'm not sure if I went to Boston I would have found these records. And I couldn't, for $100, pay parking in Boston or buy the gas. But here was a way of getting there and doing that. Although the names don't match perfectly, the stories fit together with what I know. Now, here's another one that is interesting. Patrick Keating Sr. Patrick Keating, my grandmother was Julia Keating. Her dad was Patrick Keating. He was born in Armagh, Northern Ireland. And he came here with his dad, Patrick Keating. This is the Patrick Keating Sr. I never found any records of this guy in New Hampshire. Somehow or other, I thought maybe I could find him in Massachusetts, because if he came to Boston somehow somebody got on the Boston Main Railroad and got to New Hampshire. But I couldn't find him in New Hampshire. I thought maybe he lived in Massachusetts, where I did find a Patrick married to a Margaret, which was the case. But the NEHGS, again, they found him with the wrong spelling. In the 1870 census, they found a Patrick Keating of the right age with his daughter Anne in a town called Gornick, a part of Rochester, New Hampshire. And Anne, it turns out, was living with Patrick Sr. She was also living with Patrick Jr. It turns out as they discovered that Patrick Sr. died between the time of the first part of the census and the second part of the census. So that's why Anne was located as being in two family groups in the same town at the same time. These researchers are pretty clever to be able to figure that out. I think the difference was between June 29th and July 11th, when the two parts of the census were put together. But I had never found any record of Patrick Sr. living in New Hampshire. Now I found of him, in effect, dying in New Hampshire. Okay, next. You've heard of the Plains of Abraham, where the English and the French fought. The English defeated the French on the Plains of Abraham. Those Plains of Abraham were owned by a man named Abraham Martin. And one of the great historians of Quebec is a priest called Tanguay. And he said that Abraham Martin was the father of Anne Martin, who was the wife of Jean Coté. Coté and Anne Martin are in my line. Everyone would want Abraham Martin to be their relative. He was a rich guy. He was prominent in the city. But now in a recent article in the winter of 2012, it said Anne Martin was not the daughter of Abraham Martin. And in effect they prove why in an article in French, which I won't explain to you. But you have to keep track of all the dates, and it turned out that the reason why this fell apart was that she was too young to be the person that they thought she was, and so on. But you can't, again, it just simply proves that you can't believe everything that you read, and even if it comes from a great source, as is Tanguay. Next one, please. So I'm not done. I'm trying to work on some new O'Malley partners, and I'll explain that to you in a minute. The O'Malley partners that I was working with here refer to some folks in Chicago. And they're relatives of owners, sisters of owners who ended up in Chicago. I have annual contact with most of the family members because when I republish my website, I put out all kinds of stuff. I want to get the word out there. Hey, I got new data and new stuff. And you want to take a look at it and see what you know. And then as things happen, I was in contact with one of these Chicago guys, a young man who's a graphic artist, really nice guy, and he was asking me about his grandfather. His grandfather was a mulligan. I'm not too big on mulligans, so I didn't really answer. I didn't know anything about mulligans, as a matter of fact. But he was asking, he was interested in finding out something about mulligan. Well, it turns out in the course of this, his grandmother, who was a sister of Una, passed away. Then I got two contacts from from a mulligan and from a Lyons. And then thirdly, I heard from him. So all of a sudden, I'm getting all kinds of information, and it's starting to fit together. And so that's my conclusion, is that you've got to keep working these things, working these sources, and understanding what's happening. Now, let me go to the next slide, please. Okay, now you're going to have to, or I'm going to have to push that slide up. Can you do that? No, push it up on the screen. It's a touch screen. Oops, what did you do? All right. All right, okay, we'll stay with that, okay? Here's the oldest O'Malley we found on the graph, Tague or Timothy O'Malley. His son was John. And John was married to Bridget Burns, and she had 7 known children. Let me see if I can.
You can do it.
No, it's not going to work. They got too clever with this, but at any rate, I know now of 7 children of this Tague, and then of the family below that. So I'm filling in. When I first knew things, I knew the line from me to the current people, and then to my great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather, and so on up the line, to around 1770 when this guy, Sean, was born. So it's 1740 or so when Tague was born. So that gives you an idea as to how you can do this thing. But what I wanted to do is to just surprise you with a couple of things like you get from these family members. You've heard of chain migration. People come and they follow people that they know. Tom Lyons, who's best I can figure out, about a 70-year-old lawyer in St. Paul, Minnesota area. And his mother was one of Una's sisters. But he writes me and he said, his mother was the oldest and left Ireland at 16 to join her aunt, Annie O'Malley, who was married to an O'Malley who lived in Schenectady. O'Malley married O'Malley. Call it double O'Malley. It's like marrying cousins. She lived there in Schenectady for several years before going to Chicago to visit the World's Fair. She stayed with her aunt, Teresa Stanton Kane, married to John Kane from near Westport. In Chicago, Mary met and fell in love with her second cousin, Tom Lyons, and they were married in 1939. You start to get a flavor of all this interrelationship and so on. You think that's something? Hear the other side of the family. Tom Lyons talking about his dad. My dad was convinced at the age of 20 to leave Fermoil with his brother Patrick by his uncle John McNamara, Tom's mother's brother, who had done quite well in Chicago, working for Tom's Uncle Tom Lyons, who started a hauling business with horses and wagons in Chicago. Tom went to Chicago straight away and got a job at Lyons Brothers in 1926. Soon thereafter, the General Electric Company, for whom my mother's uncle, Patrick O'Malley, produced electric refrigerators. Then, John McNamara went to the fire department and took Patty with him. Tom, my dad, got a job as a doorman at the Drake Hotel on Michigan Boulevard and stayed there for many years until his cousin, blonde Tom Lyons, son of one of the brothers who owned Lyons Brothers, was shot on the job at the Continental Bank on LaSalle Street in downtown Chicago. Blonde Tom survived and went to work for the fire department, and my dad took his job as a guard at the bank and stayed there until 1968 when he retired to Park Rapids, Minnesota with my mom. You get an idea of all these connections, this intrigue, how they're following somebody, how somebody's finding them a job. They end up going to Park Rapids, Minnesota, because that's a place they used to go fishing in the summertime. You know, so it's a small world, and you got to work to understand it, and you got to draw it out on paper. And you know, how do you know that so and so is a cousin? Is it first cousin? Is it second cousin? What kind of cousin is he? Finally, the last example I get out of these guys was, you notice that Lyons said that his dad, Lyons, was Fermoil. I started writing down who was marrying whom and where they lived. Now in Ireland, There are parishes. A parish can be a pretty big place. There are townlands within the parish. The townland that my O'Malley's came from and where Una lived was a place called Kinnadewey. Kinnadewey had 325 acres. The O'Malleys had 25 of that. 325 acres, and about 10 different families lived in that place. Similarly, Una's sister married a MacDonald, and he came from Tullibon. And then there was an O'Malley in there, and an O'Malley married an O'Malley. And O'Malley at that time come from Corrigan. That was on one of those pictures of the cemetery plots. My O'Malley came from Kinnadewey, but he married somebody, Bridget Henahan, from Lewisburg. Lyons, we said, came from Fermoil. Stanton, another one, came from Finoil. McNamara came from Devlin. You can plot these things out on a Google map. It's as easy as putting Kinnadewey, County Mayo, Ireland in there, and it'll show you where that town is on the map. Similarly, you can put in the next town, Fermoil. That's the place where the Lyons came from. You find out how far did these O'Malley relatives have to go to find a mate. The biggest distance between here is about 7 miles. They're going no more than a mile or 2 or 3 at best to find their mates. They don't have transportation. They don't have a lot of horses or cows or animals or God knows how they get. They walk where they go. And because of that, they don't go very far to find somebody. And they may find somebody with the same name. They may find an O'Malley. And it could be a first cousin, it could be a second cousin, it could be a third cousin. And the priest may make a note on the thing or not. But usually it was allowed. And in fact, I'm going to do the same kind of thing with my relatives in Canada, because they didn't move much either. From 1600 to almost 1900, 300 years, they didn't move more than 50 miles south from the city of Quebec. And it wasn't until after the Civil War that they started coming to America to work in the textile mills, where there was where they could earn cash, real cash. They never earned cash before. They were just subsistence farmers. So at any rate, I hope what I'm telling you is that you can expand as this thing was supposed to do, and that's the problem with using now PowerPoint 2013. You can expand greatly your knowledge of the family in terms of, and you can go out to find other relatives who are in other parts of the family, who are in other locations. The idea that Una had two sisters in Chicago, and they had large families, and there was only one exception there, where one of them came from Roscommon or something. Well, the only reason why she married someone from Roscommon is that they both worked during the Second World War in Coventry, or First World War in Coventry in England, and so they met there. So, but at any rate, you can gain a lot of information on your family, what they're doing, and so on. You can break some of these brick walls that you have, because the brick walls that you have are no walls to somebody else. It's like when we couldn't solve the issue of Daniel Sheedy, and was he born in Ireland or was he born in New York? Two cousins, Daniel Page rather, two cousins immediately knew, because they had looked up and they had his declaration of intent from the naturalization work. And so they knew immediately he came from Galway and when he came from Galway. So then you can go back to the Galway records, and certainly then you find exactly what it is. And you have the good records. So what I want to do now is to, if we have a little bit of time left, is to answer any particular questions that you might have. Yes?
Mr. O'Malley, they say to live in the future. Why are you going to the past? I mean, you have the satisfaction of going to knowing what happened in 1890 and things like that. That is your personal.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be interested in this at all. Except that there had been a historical connection with my family, which I knew nothing about, all the time since the famine in 1850s, when the first came here. And they kept a connection back to Ireland, which was strange, because most Irish, they don't want to know anything about what went on over there. It was a bad place and they were damn glad to be out of there. Whereas, for some reason, my family knew and kept in contact. And then when they came here, many of them came, and as it said here, went to visit an O'Malley in Schenectady or wherever it was, or came to New Hampshire, visited an aunt there. And that's how they got started. And then they branched out from there. So I'm fascinated by where they went and how they went there, and that kind of thing. And you start to peel away at that as you go.
Thank you.
I have a question about the DNA.
Yes.
That seems like a pretty random thing to find someone in Australia. So how does that work today? You obviously gave some of your DNA.
I gave my DNA sample in New York. It goes into a database. There was a project called the Malley, M-A-L-A-Y project. It was for that family. And we both signed up for that. When they got my data and they got his data, at first it connected on sort of the state of the art. I think this was probably 10 years ago. We connected on 12 samples, 12 things. That's really not sufficient. Now they're up to 60-some. But the data was in there in the data bank, and they were able to analyze it to a greater extent and got it down so that there was a match not just at 12, but at 24, whatever the word is, samples. And, pardon?
Those are markers?
Markers, yes. And so that, and there now, there was not only the fact that there was a match, but I had a way of independently confirming that there was a relationship over there. So, and what he was telling me was jiving with what I had known. Yeah.
Mr. O'Malley, I have been asked by my son and nephew to update the copyright that was given to my brother, my sister, and I on the topic genealogy that goes back to 1526. Now, their effort has been able to go back to earlier generations and to fill in the gaps since 1980 when this was published in copyright. My question to you is a copyright necessary?
A copyright, I don't know if the copyright is necessary, but it shows, you're protecting what you've done. You can't protect the facts. The copyright doesn't talk to the facts that so-and-so married so-and-so on such and such a date. But your words and your descriptions and that kind of stuff is what you're copywriting. So the fact that you have a book and the book is of a particular format and style and that kind of stuff, the copyright handles that. And it doesn't swear that everything in there is correct. There's no way it can do that.
But the copyright is precluding others from using that information?
In exactly the same format, yes. Now, oftentimes people put their data up in trees and that kind of stuff. They can have it copyrighted, but the fact that a tree is there, that can't be copyrighted because that's just a filling in of a fixed format. Now, the fact that you have a blank in the tree at some point, I would guess that could make a difference because that means you didn't know that such and such was related or whatever. There's a whole field of interest in copyright law as opposed to genealogy, and there's a particular author, Di Bartolo, I forget what her name is. Google Di Bartolo, or I'll send you a reference to it. And she has a book on her experiences with copyright law and writings on genealogy.
How accurate are ship records, 1850 prior, 1850 after, from Ireland?
When they went on the ship, some of it's okay. There's a whole bunch of, for example, you can get in the Morristown Library, which is an excellent library, the famine records. It talks about the ships from Ireland to America, I think to New York principally, in the 1847 to 52 range, those 7 years. The difficulty that you have is it identifies exactly who's on that boat, what their ages are and so on, and their relationships. So you can find mother, father, and the kids. You have to know enough to know if that's your Michael O'Malley. And that's the issue that you come up with. Many of them at that time didn't travel necessarily as a family. If you're going to identify the whole family, you've got a half a shot at it. But then many of the people came to Boston. There may not be as good records in Boston as there were in New York. And then others came to Canada. It was much cheaper to go to Canada, like 3 pounds as opposed to 5 pounds, which meant a lot. So they went in so-called coffin ships, which hauled lumber from Canada to England and back. So about 2/3 of the Canadian Irish, the Irish that came into Canada, eventually made their way to the United States. So, yeah.
Is there any connection with the love of genealogy and doing jigsaw puzzles?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't do jigsaw puzzles. But many genealogists may. I just don't know.
If you have Irish relatives that came over in 1790,
Yes.
any good suggestions on how you find out the family back in Ireland that came from County Antrim?
Well, you're saying two things. One, you know there are two kinds of Irish. Catholic Irish and Protestant Irish.
Protestant Irish.
The Protestant Irish, many of them were the Scotch Irish. And many of the Scotch Irish were very prominent after they came to America. Many of them came before the famine.
Yeah, they came in the 1790s.
That's right. And so there may well be records that would show where
Trying to find the family they left in Ireland. The whole mother, father, and children came to Charleston, but I haven't been able to figure out how I make that connection.
Do you know the family name?
I know the family name.
Okay. Then, and you know where they came from in Ireland?
Not just Antrim.
Well, yes, but there are in Ireland. The 26 counties, there's 6 in the north. Each of the counties, and sometimes more than one in the county, they have family history centers. As an example, in Mayo there were 2, in Clare there were 1, in Armagh there were 1. If you can look up the Irish family,
I think that there's so many records were burned in some fire.
you don't have to worry about the fires, particularly in Northern Ireland, because if they were Northern Irish, their records would, let's see, their records may and may not have been burned. And the Northern Ireland records may be separate from there. That was 1922.
Yeah, we're 1790, this is the problem.
Those records may still exist. And I would try to get a hold of the Family History Center and see what they could do for you. You can write to them, they'll do studies. Sometimes they'll charge you a lot, and sometimes they'll charge you a little. Yes. It's all perfectly clear? You understand how to get over these brick walls? You have to keep plugging at it. I think that's the real solution. And you have to keep communicating with people, and communicating with people beyond your immediate group. And as you do that, I think you find more opportunities to get a better understanding of what it is you're trying to do. Okay? Thank you.